All right. This joke says, "Did you hear the joke about toilet paper? It's terrible." And they spell tear because you tear toilet paper off. All right, chapter 17, best possible speed. The captain of HMS Hurricane, Hugh Crofton Sims, had kept the speed around 15 knots, about 17 miles per hour, through the night. About mid-morning, the winds had died down enough for Sims to increase the pace to 31 miles per hour. To be of any help, he needed to reach the sea with enough daylight to search. Sims expected it would take many hours to rescue everyone. He didn't know exactly where the survivors would be or how spread out they were. He knew Corp children had been on board, 90 of them, and other children with families. The survivors would be waiting in lifeboats and conditions were not good. The longer the children were exposed to the cold, the more their chance of survival diminished. What Sims and his crew didn't know was just how bad the situation was. That so many lifeboats had not lowered well. That some had tipped over, dumping passengers into the water. That many had taken on so much water that children had drowned in the boats. That most of the children were clad only in pajamas. That children had grown so cold in the night that their organs shut down and they died. That many were near death now. The crew of the Hurricane knew none of this, but they knew they had to find the lifeboats and quickly. With wind and currents, the lifeboats had certainly drifted, probably in different directions. So Sims and his navigator, Patrick Fletcher, decided to use a technique called a box search. Fletcher knew the last position of the Benares from the SOS call. He looked at the wind data and mapped out a 20 square mile search area, divided into a grid. Sims and Fletcher would navigate the ship into one square or box of the grid at a time, and the Hurricane's crew would look slowly and carefully for specks that could be lifeboats or rafts. The Hurricane also carried a small and steady rowboat called a whaler. The whaler would be used to rescue survivors if approaching them and the destroyer proved too dangerous. The wake from a large ship could easily topple a raft or an unsteady lifeboat. Sims also thought there would be so many people to rescue that an extra vessel would be necessary. Albert Gorman, the skipper of the whaler, and his crew were eager and ready. With the increased speed, the Hurricane arrived about 30 miles northeast, where the Benares had gone down. It was earlier than Sims expected, about 1 in the afternoon. He slowed the ship to have a good look. He and his crew saw no specks, no possible lifeboats or rafts, but someone, could be hidden by the waves. The captain blasted the hurricane siren. Anyone in the area could hear that help had arrived. Sims and his crew listened for an answer. A horn blowing back, someone yelling. They looked for flares, flags, someone waving at a shirt. They looked and listened for any kind of a signal. They waited. Blasted their horn again. There was no answer. This probably meant nobody was nearby, but they had to be sure. Someone could be on a raft or lifeboat with no way to signal. This was the first square of the grid. There were many more to go. The Hurricane moved very slowly as every available sailor peered through binoculars and telescopes or searched with their naked eyes. They didn't see any debris, no sign of the Benares. The destroyer moved slowly through the entire area of that square. Nothing. So there he is, looking. Meanwhile, the number of survivors continued to dwindle. Some lifeboats had no live people on them. Some, like Collins, had only a few. One lifeboat had 2 Corps boys who would survive only if they were rescued soon. Bess and Beth and their remaining Lascar were weakening to the point of near death. All 3 people on Jack's raft were alive, but John McGlasson was drifting in and out of consciousness. Sonny and Derek and Margaret Beach, now in the Marina's lifeboat, were alive and comfortable, but they didn't know where Barbara was, whether she was even alive. Barbara Betch was alive. In fact, her lifeboat was in good shape, one of the few that had landed well enough, as was Mary Cornish's, waiting for rescue. Mary was keeping the boys entertained as best she could. Mostly, they were talking about what had happened, going over and over again where they'd been, what they'd been doing when the torpedo hit. They asked each other, "Would you rather be torpedoed at sea or bombed at home?" "Torpedoed at sea," was the resounding answer every time. The Hurricane kept searching. Finally, someone spotted a sail. They were now 14 miles away from where the Benares had gone down. The sail was on the Marina's lifeboat, the one that held survivors from the Benares, including Derek, Sonia, and Margaret Beach. Sims navigated the destroyer carefully toward the smaller craft. The Betches saw its silver outline. Even though the ship was moving toward them, Derek Betch couldn't believe the rescue would really happen. After the night on the raft, his mother lying on top of him so he wouldn't fall into the sea and die, Sonia tumbling into the sea twice and being saved by Tommy Milligan, his mother struggling to hold onto the raft, her fingers ripped and red with blood, and then at dawn, threatening to give up. Then the lifeboat, food, water, condensed milk, blankets, bodies, warmth. He didn't believe the rescue ship would come. Didn't know when it would come. Then all of a sudden, here it is. The hurricane crew instructed the marina crew to lower the lifeboat sail to keep the craft stationary. The hurricane would come to them. Stay put, stay still. Derek had to sit still and wait. It seemed impossible. On the other hand, he didn't have the strength to jump up and down. He and his sister and mother could barely move. They were so stiff and sore and tired. The hurricane pulled next to the lifeboat. When the crew saw Sonia and Derek, they began cheering and yelling. They were thrilled to rescue some children. Sonia watched as the net was thrown down the ship's side. The crew from the marina easily scrambled up the scores of rope. But Sonia and Derek and their mother couldn't move, let alone climb up a net. None of the Benares people could. The rescuers knew what to do. A sailor entangled his legs in the net, weaving his arms free. The crew made a line of people, passing Sonia and Derek and their mother up the net to the deck of the hurricane. Sonia felt like a wet sack. When they put her down, a sailor asked, "Can you walk?" "Well, of course I can walk," she answered. She put one foot out to take a step and immediately fell down. The sailor picked her up and carried her to a room by the ship's funnel or flue. It's where sailors went to warm up after coming off watch. As the ship started moving slowly again, continuing the search for more survivors, the Betches began to thaw out. They were caked in salt from the ocean and needed a warm bath. Their life jackets had shrunk, and the sailors cut them off. They gave Derek and Sonia warm milk. Margaret and the other adults were given rum. Once they were warm enough, the Betches were taken below decks. Sonia and Derek undressed. Sonia took off her coat. She discovered that, unbelievably, the jewelry box was still there, in her pocket, with the rings and brooch still in it. Margaret gave Sonia and Derek a hot bath and put them in clothes the sailors had given them. The sailors' own clothes. Way too big, but Sonia thought that they were generous. The white and flowing, tropical pants and tops, warm, dry, heavenly. They ate hot food, vegetable soup, baked beans, and then, warm and fed, Sonia and Derek were put in the captain's bed where they fell fast asleep. But Margaret couldn't sleep. Where was Barbara? She could not sleep until she knew Barbara was safe. So there is them climbing up. The hurricane crew was cheered by the rescue of these people, especially the two children. They were determined to find more. Sims continued to maneuver slowly through the boxes on the grid. The crew on lookout all around the ship, at the bow and the stern, starboard and port, in the crow's nest. They saw nothing, just the empty ocean. No lifeboats, no rafts, no debris. Mile after painstaking mile for 2 hours. Somewhere out there, Bess and Beth were clinging to their overturned lifeboat. Colin was sitting very still in the middle of his. Jack Healy was so cold. Finally, the hurricane crew spotted some dots in the distance. Could they be lifeboats with more survivors? They sailed closer, and through binoculars, sailors could see 4 wooden rafts. Each raft held only one person, all Indian sailors. One of the men sat cross-legged on the nearest. The hurricane crew rescued the sailors slowly, carefully, tying a line around their chests and pulling them up onto the ship. It took half an hour to rescue the 4. Each one was almost dead. Now it was late afternoon. There weren't many hours of daylight left. On his raft, Jack Healy felt a storm coming on.